You know something's wrong when even the crows stop calling. It was just after dusk when I crossed the rusted gate and stepped onto the Mercer land again. The air was thick and wet, and the fog clung to the mountain like it had teeth. I hadn't seen this place in 5 years, not since the night Carl vanished behind the vault doors. And yet, the house stood just as I remembered it, crooked, silent, and watching. The trees leaned in closer than they used to, like they'd grown hungry in my absence. I killed the engine of the rental car and just sat there for a minute, listening. No birds. No insects. Only the wind, dragging along the gravel like something crawling toward me. The estate loomed above, carved into the hillside, half swallowed by vines and rot. Our ancestors had called it hollow shade, which always felt too poetic for a house that had never known warmth. 100 generations had lived and died here, all with the same cursed task, to guard the vault. The place where the demons slept. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I told myself it was the cold. Truth is, I didn't want to go inside. But I did. The front door creaked open with a sigh, like it recognized me. Dust exploded in the air as I stepped through, and the scent of mildew and decay clawed at my throat. I flicked the flashlight on. The beams danced over portraits of dead relatives, faces long gone, eyes that still followed. The silence was alive here. It breathed. I passed the sitting room, the broken grandfather clock, the scorched carpet where lightning once struck through the roof during a storm I never forgot. Every step echoed like a whisper from beneath the floorboards. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard it. A scrape. Low, slow dragging. It came from the basement door. I froze. The flashlight flickered. No, I whispered. Not tonight. I forced myself to move. My old room was at the end of the hallway, past the old nursery and the library with the boarded windows. The handle turned stiff in my grip, and the door groaned open. Nothing had changed. My bed was still made. My books still stacked in a leaning tower on the desk. The old map of the catacombs, drawn by Carl when we were just boys, still tacked above the dresser. For a moment, I let myself believe none of it had happened. That Carl was still alive, that I hadn't abandoned the only promise our family had ever made. But then I saw it. On my pillow. A piece of bone. Thin. Burned at the edges. Human. My stomach clenched. I didn't pick it up. Instead, I sat on the bed, rubbing my eyes as the cold sank in. The dreams had dragged me back here. Dreams of Carl calling my name from below, of stone doors swinging open by themselves, of shadows that didn't follow the light. But this wasn't a dream anymore. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out his journal, the one they found on the vault stairs the morning after he vanished. I'd never dared open it. Until now. The cover was cracked, leather-stained with time. My fingers shook as I flipped it open. First page. To Theo, if you're reading this, I'm not dead. Not exactly. A chill crawled down my spine. The window rattled. Something groaned under the floor. The journal's next line was scrawled in Carl's messy handwriting, slanted and uneven. You have to finish what I started. Before it finishes with you. I closed the book and stared at the wall. Outside, the fog thickened. The mountain held its breath. And below me, in the catacombs, something moved. When I was a child, I used to believe the house was alive. It creaked when no one was moving, whispered when the wind was still, and always seemed to watch you from behind old paintings and dim corners. Standing here now, years later, I realize I was right. The Mercer house isn't just old, it remembers. The front door groaned shut behind me with a sound like a dying breath. Dust hung in the air, thick and gray, moving like smoke. I stepped inside slowly, boots echoing on the warped wooden floor. The entry hall looked like something pulled out of a nightmare, familiar yet wrong. Time had eaten away at everything. Mold climbed the walls like veins. The chandelier was tilted and covered in spiderwebs that shimmered in the dim afternoon light. I set down my duffel bag and let the silence swallow me. It had been 5 years since I last stood here. 5 years since Carl disappeared. Since I ran. The house hadn't changed much, but I had. Back then, I was still a man who believed in logic, in facts, in things that could be explained. Now I wasn't sure what I believed in. Maybe that was why I came back. Maybe I needed to know if the nightmare we grew up guarding was real. Or maybe I just needed to see if I was already too late. I walked deeper inside, passing the faded portrait of our great-grandfather, Elias Mercer, the first documented guardian of the vault. His face had faded over the years, but the eyes were still sharp, still watching. The sitting room was just as I remembered, dusty bookshelves, a dead fireplace, and Carl's old desk in the corner. I crossed the room and ran my fingers over the desk's surface. It was scratched and worn, the leather blotter cracked with age. I opened one of the drawers. Empty. Another. Nothing. Then the third drawer stuck. I pulled harder, and it finally slid open with a harsh snap. Inside was a small black notebook. The edges were burned, the cover stained with something dark that had dried like blood. I opened it carefully. It was Carl's handwriting. June 2nd. Something moved under the vault last night. Not rats. Not the usual hum. Something older. It whispered my name. June 3rd. The runes are weakening. The door pulses like a heartbeat. Elias was wrong. We're not guarding it. We're feeding it. I stopped reading. The air in the room suddenly felt thick. Too heavy. I closed the notebook and held it tight to my chest. That night, I stayed in the old guest room. The same one I used to sneak into when storms would shake the windows. I laid on the mattress, hard as stone, and stared at the cracked ceiling, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. Sometime after midnight, I heard scratching. Not from the door. Not from the window. From underneath the floorboards. At first it was soft, like nails on wood. But then it grew louder, more urgent. I held my breath and sat up in the dark, listening. Scritch. 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 It moved, crawling under the floor, passing beneath my bed, and stopping directly below me. Then came the whisper. You left me down there. It was Carl's voice. But not quite, like someone else was speaking through it. I jumped out of bed, heart slamming in my chest. The floor was cold, damp beneath my feet. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and shone it at the floorboards. Nothing. Just old wood and shadows. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I walked out to the back of the property, past the dead garden and the half-collapsed shed. The entrance to the vault was hidden behind a rusted gate, buried in ivy. I pulled the vines aside and stared at the stone steps leading down into the earth. The iron door at the bottom waited. I hadn't seen it since that night. My fingers trembled as I brushed dust off Carl's notebook. I flipped to the back. The last thing he wrote was a single line. When the door opens, it doesn't let things out. It lets things in. I looked back at the house, and I knew then, whatever I'd come back to fix, it had already started. I hadn't planned to go down there that night. Not yet. I told myself I just needed to check the generator in the cellar. Make sure the place wouldn't go completely dark before the storm rolled in. But something pulled me. The moment I stepped onto the cellar stairs, I felt it. A shift in the air. Not cold exactly, more like stillness, a silence so thick it made my ears ring. The old wooden steps creaked under my boots, louder than usual, like they were warning me. I paused halfway down. My flashlight flickered. Once. Twice. Then it held steady. The vault door stood at the end of the cellar corridor, behind two rusted iron gates and a stone archway carved with symbols my ancestors etched centuries ago. Symbols meant to hold something inside. But tonight, something felt wrong. The runes on the arch, those crooked ancient things, used to hum faintly, even when I was a kid. You couldn't hear it with your ears, not really. You felt it in your teeth, in your bones. But now, nothing. Just stone and silence. I walked up to the gates and reached for the latch. It was already unhooked. That stopped me cold. My hands began to sweat. I looked around the cellar, suddenly unsure if I was alone. The walls were weeping moisture, the air smelled like earth and rust, and the shadows, they moved wrong. But I opened the gate anyway. The first vault chamber was lined with shelves of old scrolls, jars filled with ash, and broken candle stubs melted onto stone pedestals. I stepped inside. My boots echoed. Each step sounded like it didn't just bounce off the walls, it echoed downward into the earth. At the far end of the room, the second door, the real vault door, stood slightly ajar. My heart dropped. It was impossible. That door hadn't been opened in over 5 years. Not since Carl vanished. It took both of us to turn the iron wheel that sealed it shut. Even then, we needed to chant the rite as we turned it. And yet, there it was. Open. Only by a few inches. But that was enough. I should have run. I should have bolted back up the stairs, boarded the place shut, and left again for good. But I didn't. Instead, I walked up to the door and peered into the darkness beyond. My flashlight beam flickered again. Just for a second. But in that blink of light, I saw something move. It was fast. Low to the ground. Something with too many limbs. Or maybe none at all. I don't know. I aimed the flashlight straight ahead, hand trembling. Carl? I said. I don't know why. The name just fell out of me. Silence. Then the whisper. It wasn't from ahead. It was from behind me, right at the back of my neck. You left us, Theo. I spun so fast I nearly fell. The flashlight swung wild, hit the wall, and dropped from my hand with a clatter. The beam landed sideways, facing the far corner of the chamber. Nothing there. Just the stone. Just the dust. But I heard footsteps now. Soft. Bare. Moving behind the vault door. Then something else, breathing. Not mine. Low. Raspy. Hungry. I crouched to grab the flashlight. My fingers brushed the handle when the beam caught a face in the crack of the vault. Carl's face. Pale. Eyes dark and sunken. Lips curled into a half-smile, like he'd been waiting for me all this time. I screamed. I didn't mean to, but I did. When I blinked, the face was gone. I slammed the vault door shut, twisting the iron wheel with everything I had. My hands burned against the freezing metal. I don't remember getting back up the stairs. I don't remember locking the cellar behind me. All I remember is the sound that followed me. That same whisper. Too late. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the floor, flashlight in hand, staring at the cellar door. Because something had come through that vault crack. And I don't think it was just a memory. I woke before dawn. The cold had settled into my bones during the night, and the house groaned around me, as if it were trying to breathe through the dust. I hadn't slept well. The dreams had returned, Carl's voice echoing from the floorboards, whispering about the truth beneath the bloodline. I didn't know what he meant. But I had to find out. I started with the old study. The door had swollen with moisture over the years, and I had to throw my shoulder into it twice before it gave way with a shriek. Dust exploded from the air like it had been holding its breath for years. The room smelled of mold, paper, and rot. Sunlight poured in through stained glass windows, casting strange red shapes on the walls. The bookshelves leaned like dying trees, their spines split and pages yellowed. But behind the desk, buried beneath a filthy canvas sheet, stood the Mercer family cabinet. It had been locked when I left, but now the door swung slightly open. Inside were old documents, maps, letters, and photos. I started sorting through them, one by one, trying to make sense of the pieces Carl might have left behind. That's when I found it, an old family tree, hand-drawn on crumbling parchment. Names scrawled in neat black ink traced back over 300 years. Every few generations, a name would be crossed out in red. I counted at least 12. Next to each of those names, someone, likely Carl, had scribbled small notes. Disappeared. Buried beneath the gate. Eyes turned black. Burned alive in the chapel. My heart beat louder the further I read. These weren't deaths from age or sickness. They were all violent. Mysterious. Every generation had a guardian. Every guardian had met a gruesome end. And now it was me. At the bottom of the page were two names, mine and Carl's. Carl's had been circled in charcoal, over and over, until the paper tore beneath the pressure. A final line had been written underneath. He was the last seal. When he broke, something woke. I pushed back from the desk, the chair screeching against the floor. My skin felt too tight, like something was crawling under it. I needed air. I stepped out of the study and followed the hallway toward the west wing, where the portraits of our ancestors hung. They stared down at me, men in long coats, women in black veils, children with lifeless eyes. None of them smiled. But there was something stranger. A single figure appeared in every portrait, just barely visible in the background. A tall man in shadow, face blurred, watching from a distance. I hadn't noticed it as a child. But now, as I walked from frame to frame, he was always there. Always watching. My blood ran cold. Was it Carl playing tricks with old paintings? Or had that figure always been there, something passed down with the house, hidden in plain sight? I went back to the cabinet, dug deeper, shoved aside broken frames and letters until my fingers hit something cold. A box, iron and heavy. Inside were old photographs, brittle and sepia-toned. Men and women gathered near the vault's entrance. Some held books. Others held weapons. One photo had a handwritten note. Sealing ceremony, 1842. They stood in a circle, all of them looking down at a shape bound in chains. I squinted at it. It looked almost human. Almost. I turned over the next photo. It was blank on the back. No writing. But it made my hands shake. It was of Carl, standing alone in front of the vault, holding the book of sealing. His face was wrong, too still, too hollow. His eyes were pure black. And I knew then, whatever had taken Carl hadn't just started. It had always been waiting. Waiting for a Mercer to fail. Waiting for me. And I had already left the door open. I closed the box, but it didn't help. The silence around me felt thicker now, as if the house itself was listening. I looked over my shoulder. The hallway was empty, but I swore I heard breathing, coming from the wall. The wind outside howled like something alive, clawing at the boarded windows of the house. I lit another candle and placed it beside the old leather-bound journal on the dining room table. The flame flickered violently, casting shadows across the room. Carl's handwriting danced across the yellowed pages, erratic, dark, and hurried. This was one of the older journals. The cover was cracked and smelled of mildew, and when I opened it, the spine groaned like an old man. I had already skimmed through it once, but tonight felt different. The vault had been humming louder lately. Something beneath the house was stirring. I began to read slowly, trying not to skip anything this time. I thought the voice came from the tomb. But it doesn't. It comes from somewhere deeper. Not a place. A feeling. Like guilt that never dies. Like pain with a voice. I swallowed hard. Carl had been unraveling long before he entered the vault for the last time. I'd told myself for years that he'd gone mad, that the darkness down there had broken him. But reading this, it didn't feel like madness. It felt like something else. Like he was peeling back layers of truth that none of us were meant to see. Theo thinks I'm obsessed. But he's wrong. I'm chosen. The dreams aren't dreams anymore. They're instructions. Whispers of a world beneath this one, trying to be born. I stared at that line for a long time. Trying to be born. The house groaned above me. Or below. I couldn't tell anymore. I turned the page. A crude drawing was etched in the middle of it. A circle with jagged symbols along the edge, and a human figure suspended upside down inside the circle. Its mouth was open, and thin black lines poured from it like smoke. Around the figure were the words, "Open the mirror, and the mirror will open you." I slammed the journal shut. It wasn't just his handwriting anymore. The ink changed partway through. Thicker. Not quite black. I didn't want to know what he'd used. I got up from the table and paced. I could hear the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway, but nothing else. No wind now. No creaking. Just that steady, unnatural silence that settles in right before something happens. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way upstairs. Carl's old room was down the hall, third door on the left. I hadn't opened it since I came back. The doorknob was cold. Too cold. I turned it slowly and pushed the door open. Dust floated in the air like ash. The curtains were drawn shut, and the smell, old books, dried herbs, and something coppery, hit me all at once. His bed was still unmade. The sheets rumpled, as if he'd just stepped out. On the desk sat another stack of journals, and above it, a wall covered in drawings. Hundreds of them. All the same face. Mine. In each sketch, I looked more distorted. Hollow eyes. Mouth open in a scream. In some, I was standing in front of the vault. In others, I was kneeling. One drawing had me standing over Carl's body, covered in black veins, holding the bell we used during rituals. I backed away. My hand brushed against something on the floor. A tape recorder. I bent down and picked it up. The tape inside was labeled. Entry 17, it's inside now. My thumb hovered over the play button. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Click. The tape whirred to life. At first, just static. Then Carl's voice, quiet, shaky, like he was speaking from the dark. Day 26. I've stopped sleeping. The voice is louder at night. Sometimes I hear it through the walls. Sometimes from inside me. A pause. A shaky breath. It knows Theo's coming back. It always knew. The tomb isn't sealed anymore. That part of the seal was never stone. It was me. The tape clicked off by itself. I stood there frozen. The air in the room grew heavy, like I was breathing in syrup. I stumbled out into the hall, my flashlight shaking. Something had changed. Not just in the house. In me. And I knew, with a deep and terrifying certainty, that Carl hadn't just been talking to a demon. He'd become part of it. And now it was talking to me too. I woke up gasping. There was dirt under my nails again. The taste of iron clung to my tongue, like I'd been chewing on old pennies in my sleep. My sheets were soaked in sweat, clinging to me like wet paper. The house groaned above me, the wood swollen from last night's rain. Or maybe it wasn't the rain. Maybe it was the thing below. Breathing. I didn't remember going to sleep. But the bell was gone. That cursed brass bell, the one with the spiral carved into the handle and a crack that split the rim, was missing from the altar in the hallway. I'd left it there after finding it in the attic 2 days ago, buried under a pile of my grandfather's things. I remembered placing it gently down. I remembered telling myself I wouldn't touch it again. And now it was gone. I got dressed and grabbed the flashlight. The power was still flickering. The storm had knocked out most of the lines, and my backup generator wasn't doing much. Shadows moved too freely in this house now. They slithered across the walls as if the dark had grown a mind of its own. I went down into the vault. The air changed the moment I stepped past the cellar door. It always did, like stepping into a mausoleum soaked in mold and secrets. I had to duck low in the stone corridor. Water dripped somewhere deep, echoing like slow, steady footsteps. I reached the first chamber. That's when I saw it. The bell. It sat in the middle of the floor, perfectly upright. Around it, in a circle carved into the dirt, were dozens of tiny bones. Bird bones. I didn't know how they got there. I didn't want to know. I felt my stomach turn, and then the air shifted. Behind me, I heard the soft clang of the gate closing. I turned quickly. No one was there. Just the sound of metal echoing, and the smell of something foul wafting through the cracks in the stone. Like rot. Like something had been cooking for too long, and had started to decay while still alive. I stepped toward the bell. "Don't," a voice said. "Close. Too close." I froze. Carl's voice. I hadn't heard it that clearly in years. No radio static. No echo through old cassette tapes. Just a whisper behind my ear like he was leaning in from behind me. "You're not ready to ring it," the voice said. I spun around. Nothing. Just me and the bell and the bones. My hands trembled as I bent down, careful not to touch the circle. That was when I noticed the symbol carved into the dirt just beneath the bell. It wasn't from any of the old Mercer books. It was new, fresher, cleaner, like it had been made by something that didn't need to see, only remember. A spiral with 3 claw marks through it. That's when I knew. The demon wasn't sealed anymore. It was watching, and it wanted me to try. I backed away and nearly tripped over something. Another journal. Carl's handwriting again. The cover was soaked with something dark and sticky. The last few pages were almost unreadable, but I managed to make out a line, smeared but still legible. Every word we spoke down here fed it. Every thought. Every fear. The vault doesn't hold the demon. It is the demon. I dropped the book, and then I heard it, low, distant, but rising. A hum. It came from beneath the floor, below even the catacombs. It sounded like thousands of bees trapped behind a wall of flesh. My ears ached. My eyes watered. And still the bell didn't move. But I did. I ran. Back through the tunnel. Up the stairs. Slamming the cellar door shut behind me. I didn't stop until I reached the hallway and collapsed against the wall. I thought I'd escaped it. Thought I'd closed the vault. But it never needed to be opened. The vault had been feeding all along. And now it was finally hungry. I hadn't slept in 2 nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Carl. Not the Carl I remembered, the quiet one who used to scribble in notebooks at the kitchen table, but something else. Something that wore him. The house creaked like it was breathing. The air had grown thick, damp, and sour, like something had died in the walls. I kept lighting candles, even during the day, because the light bulbs flickered so much I couldn't trust them anymore. I started to hear humming from the basement, a tune I couldn't place, but it was familiar, like a lullaby someone once sang to me in a nightmare. By the 3rd morning, I was losing track of time. I hadn't left the house in days. The woods outside were so quiet, I thought maybe the birds had abandoned the land altogether. But that was when I saw it, standing just beyond the porch steps. A fox. At first, it seemed normal. Just a lone, skinny creature with reddish fur and a white-tipped tail. But then it turned its head toward me, and I froze. Its eyes weren't animal eyes. They were human. And not just any human, Carl's. The same greenish-gray eyes I used to see across the dinner table. Cold. Still. Watching. I whispered, "Carl?" The fox didn't move. It just stared at me for a long, frozen minute. Then it grinned. Its mouth curled in a way no animals should have. Too wide. Too knowing. I stumbled backward and slammed the door shut. My heart was thundering. My hands were shaking. I stood there, in the quiet house, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Stress. Isolation. Guilt. Maybe all 3. But when I looked through the window again, the fox was gone. That evening, I found more of Carl's notes. Not in the study, but under the floorboards in the attic, pages stuffed into a rusty tin box. They were torn, stained, and smelled of mildew and blood. The handwriting started normal, then became erratic, sharp angles, ink smeared, words overlapping. One phrase kept repeating in the margins. "The familiar is the first to wear the skin. The gate must test the blood." I didn't know what it meant. but something about that phrase made me cold all over. That night, I locked every door. I bolted the attic, the basement, even the cabinets. And then I sat in the hallway with a candle, Carl's notebook on my lap, and a fireplace poker in my hand. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up. Because when I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the hallway. I was in the basement, sitting on the stone floor, knees bent, staring at the vault door. The candle was still burning beside me. And the door, it was open. Just a crack, wide enough to see darkness. A voice whispered from inside. Soft, gentle. Theo, you're listening now. I couldn't speak. My throat had gone dry. My legs were numb. Then I heard scratching behind me. Slow, clawing sounds against the concrete. I turned. The fox. It was inside the basement now. It sat just a few feet away, eyes glowing in the candlelight. No sound. No movement. Just watching. Then it opened its mouth. And in Carl's voice it said, "You were always supposed to finish what I started." I screamed. I threw the candle at it and ran. Up the stairs, through the hallway into the kitchen. I didn't stop until I was outside, barefoot on the cold grass, staring at the woods with my breath catching in my chest. The trees were swaying gently, but there was no wind. No birds. No life. Only silence. And somewhere beneath my feet, in the roots and bones of this cursed land, I felt something stir. Something old. Something hungry. Carl hadn't just reached through the door. He had sent his first messenger through. And it had found me. The house was breathing again. I could feel it. Every time I stepped across the wooden floors, the creaks weren't random anymore. They followed me, echoed behind me, timed like a second heartbeat. The lights flickered not because of bad wiring, but because something wanted them to. The walls groaned. The air was thick, like the house itself was watching, waiting. Carl's voice had been silent for a whole day, but that only made me more anxious. Silence meant he was planning something. Or maybe I was just losing my mind. I found the book by accident. Or maybe it found me. It happened late at night. A storm had rolled in, loud thunder, heavy wind shaking the glass. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the symbols in Carl's journal, the unfinished ritual, the mirror he mentioned, and something called the door of flesh. I went back down to the basement, flashlight in hand, hoping to study the vault runes again. That's when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic thump from inside the wall. At first, I thought it was the pipes. But no, this was slower. Deliberate. Almost like a heartbeat. I followed the sound to a narrow corridor beside the cellar stairs, one I'd never noticed before. The wallpaper there was peeling badly, revealing cracked bricks beneath. I touched one of the bricks, and it gave way under my hand. Hollow. I started pulling the others out, one by one, until I uncovered a wooden box buried inside the wall, bound in rusted chains. It was coated in dust, black with mold, and the air around it was ice cold. It had no lock. I don't know why I opened it. I should have known better. But I did. Inside was a thick, ancient book wrapped in dried, cracked leather. No title. No markings. Only one thing was carved into the leather in dark ink. No, not ink. Something thicker. It read, "This is not the first time." I brought the book upstairs, laid it out on the dining table, and flipped it open with shaking hands. The pages were filled with strange symbols, twisting, curling shapes that looked like they were moving if you stared too long. But Carl's handwriting was there too, scribbled in the margins like frantic thoughts. Mirror rite must be performed at the throne. If the mirror sees fear, the rite fails. Pain is the lock. Blood is the key. The last mercer who succeeded never spoke again. There were sketches too. A mirror surrounded by bones. A figure standing in front of it, cut open across the chest. The mirror reflecting not the man, but a beast. My stomach turned. I pushed the book away and stood, pacing the room. This wasn't just a sealing ritual. This was a test. A choice. And Carl had known all along. He had gone down into that tomb not to lock the demon away, but to talk to it. Maybe even to join it. I heard a noise upstairs. A faint knock. I froze. The knocking came again. Slow. Steady. One knock, pause. Another knock. I grabbed the flashlight and crept up the stairs. The hallway was pitch black now. No lights, no moonlight. Just the sound of wind pushing against the old house. The knocking was coming from my bedroom door. I stepped closer, my breath sharp in my chest. I reached out and turned the handle. Nothing was there. But on the floor a trail of black, wet footprints. Bare feet. Leading away down the hall. My flashlight flickered. Then I heard it, Carl's voice. Soft. Calm. Whispering from behind me. You found the book. Good. You're ready now. I turned. No one there. I ran back downstairs, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My heart was racing, hands trembling. The book was still on the table. But now, one of the pages had been dog-eared. Marked. I opened it. It showed a door carved into a wall of flesh, bleeding slowly. Beneath it, a warning. The right cannot seal what is already awake. The right can only choose. I stared at it for a long time. Then slowly, I looked toward the floorboards. I could feel it again. The heartbeat beneath my feet. The same one I'd felt when I first came home. The vault was alive. And it was hungry. I wasn't just dealing with a demon. I was standing in its mouth. I didn't sleep the night before. Not because I didn't want to, but because something in the house wouldn't let me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, Carl, standing at the bottom of the vault steps, soaked in black water, smiling like he knew something I didn't. The air was colder than usual. Every creak in the wood sounded like footsteps just outside my room. I waited for dawn, but it never really came. Just a dull gray sky hanging low over the trees. The fog hadn't lifted in days. Maybe it never would. I strapped the flashlight to my chest, grabbed the ritual bell, and took one last look at the house before descending. The Mercer estate stood like a rotting tooth on the mountain, walls sagging, windows blind with grime. I didn't know if I'd see it again. The vault door groaned as I opened it. The first level was quiet. Dust floated like ash in the air. My footsteps echoed, too loud against the stone. I passed the altar where my great-grandfather's bones were found. Down past the sealed niches, past the broken runes. The path deeper into the tomb had always been blocked. Always locked behind heavy chains and rusted iron. But not now. The barrier had been pulled open, as if someone, or something, had simply torn it from its hinges. I stepped beyond. The air changed. It didn't feel like stale basement air anymore. It felt wet, alive, like I had stepped into the lungs of some sleeping beast. The walls were slick with something black. My flashlight flickered. For a moment, I thought I heard whispering again, soft, like a lullaby hummed by someone trying to remember the tune. I moved slowly, each step heavier than the last. Then I reached it. The tomb. It wasn't what I expected. No coffin. No stone slab. It was a wide circular chamber, carved perfectly into the rock. At the center sat a mirror, tall, thin, and bound in rusted chains that had fallen loose. The glass rippled like water, though there was no wind. Around the mirror were stone thrones. 7 of them. Each one had a symbol carved above it, and each one was soaked in dry, rust-colored stains. Blood. Old but still present. And there, leaning against one of the thrones, stood Carl. My breath caught. He looked exactly as I remembered him, but not. His skin was pale, almost gray. His eyes glowed faintly, like coals under ash. And his smile, it wasn't warm. It was too wide. Too calm. "Hello, brother," he said. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. "You came back," he continued. "I knew you would. We were never meant to guard it. We were meant to become it. What are you?" I finally managed. Carl stepped forward. His feet didn't make a sound. "I am what's left," he said. "Of him. Of me. Of us." He gestured to the mirror. "Look." I turned slowly. The mirror no longer showed my reflection. It showed another version of me, rotting, hollow-eyed, mouth stitched shut. Then it shifted. Another version, wearing robes, sitting on the throne. Then another, on fire, screaming into the void. I backed away. "It's not just a mirror," Carl whispered. "It's a window. And a door. It shows you what you could become. Well, you already are." My heart pounded. My legs felt weak. "You died," I said. "You went into the vault, and you never came out." Carl's grin widened. "Because I opened it. And what came through didn't need me. Not all of me." He stepped aside. "The seal is broken. It wants to finish the crossing. But it needs a vessel. One with blood thick with fear, soaked in guilt. You, Theo. You're perfect." I shook my head. "No. I came here to stop this." Carl tilted his head. "You can't stop what you are." The whispering grew louder. The mirror's surface rippled faster, as if something behind it was clawing to get through. I felt something shift inside my chest, an old memory, a fear I hadn't felt since childhood. I realized then, the demon hadn't been waiting behind the mirror. It had been waiting in me. And Carl had just opened the door. The mirror cracked. Just slightly. But enough. And everything changed. I stood at the edge of the final chamber, my boots sinking into the cold, wet earth. The tunnel behind me was breathing now, slow and steady, as if the mountain itself had lungs. The dim light from my lantern flickered against the black stone walls, casting shadows that didn't behave like they should. They moved on their own, twisting and curling even when I stood still. The tomb was open. The door that had been sealed for centuries, that my ancestors bled to protect, now stood cracked, just enough to slip through. I could see the faint outline of carvings around the frame, symbols long erased by time and rot. I reached out and traced one with my finger. It burned cold, like touching ice laced with needles. Inside, the chamber was vast and silent. Stone thrones lined the walls, each carved with a different face, some human, some not. They stared down at me with hollow eyes, mouths open in mid-scream or chant, I couldn't tell. In the center of the room sat a mirror. It wasn't glass. It was polished obsidian, perfectly smooth, taller than I was. It didn't reflect light. It drank it, and when I looked into it, it showed me things. Not just my reflection. No, it showed versions of me. A dozen theos, all standing shoulder to shoulder. One wore the family robe, holding a blood-stained book. Another was younger, screaming and on fire. One wore a crown of bones. Another knelt before something huge and unseen, hands raised in worship. Then him. Carl stepped out from behind the mirror, like he had always been there. His skin was pale, stretched too tightly over his bones. His eyes were darker than I remembered, like someone had poured ink into them. But his voice, that was still Carl's. Calm, even warm. "Brother," he said, "you finally made it." I couldn't move. My legs were frozen in place. My hands shook around the lantern, casting sharp beams across his twisted face. "You should be dead," I said quietly. "I was," he answered, smiling. "Or I thought I was. But death is just another door in this place." And I walked through it. He moved closer, slowly, his footsteps silent on the stone. The thrones around us seemed to lean in as he passed. "Morthal isn't a demon like they told us," he said. "Not claws and fire. Not in the way we imagined. It's something older. It was born from belief. From the stories passed down by our family. From fear. We didn't guard a tomb, Theo. We built a prison for something we created ourselves." I shook my head. "You're lying." He smiled again. "Am I? You read the journals. You saw the seal breaking. You felt it crawling into your dreams. It's not trying to get out. It's already here. It's been here, growing stronger with every mercer who fed it with rituals and secrets and silence." I looked back at the mirror. My reflection had changed. Now it was just one Theo in the glass. Me. But behind me stood Carl, and behind him something massive. Black wings. Burning eyes. Rows of teeth where no mouth should be. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. "Finish it," he said. "You have the book. You found the bell. You're the last mercer. You either lock it away again and pay the price like the rest of us, or you accept what we are. What you are. A vessel. A voice." "No," I said, backing away. "That's not who I am." Carl stopped. His head tilted just a little. "Then you'll die down here," he said. "But not before you see." The mirror pulsed, a deep sound, like a heartbeat underwater. The air went thick, heavy. My ears rang. The thrones began to whisper. Soft, hissing voices sang my name over and over. "Theo! Theo! Theo!" I turned, ready to run, but the door was gone. Gone. Only the mirror stood behind me now, humming. Carl's voice floated around me, gentle like a lullaby. "The tomb never held a demon, brother. It held us." Then everything went black. I couldn't feel my legs as I stepped forward, but somehow I kept walking. The tunnel narrowed behind me, leaving only the yawning chamber ahead. The walls throbbed like veins. The air was thick, wet, almost alive. Every breath tasted like blood and smoke. My hands shook, the ritual book tucked under one arm, my flashlight flickering with each step like it was gasping for life. At the center of the tomb stood the mirror. It wasn't glass, not really. It was polished stone, darker than coal, framed by bones fused into a screaming spiral. I saw my reflection, but it didn't copy me. It stared back, different. My face, but older. Gaunt. Hollow-eyed. Smiling. And behind my reflection stood Carl. "Come closer, Theo," he whispered. His voice echoed in the stone, not from his mouth. I took another step. Carl stood at the foot of the mirror now, pale and shirtless, skin cracked like dried clay. Something moved beneath it. His ribs shifted as if something inside was breathing through him. "You always wanted to understand. Now you can." I opened the book. The pages trembled in my hands. the ink glowing faintly red like smoldering coals. The mirror right was spread across 2 pages, half in Latin, half in something older. Symbols that hummed when I looked at them. They burned in my mind, even when I blinked. I began to chant. The words scraped my throat raw. I didn't know their meaning, but my tongue moved on its own. The mirror pulsed. A deep, rhythmic thump rose from the ground, as if the tomb had a heartbeat. My reflection started to change. The thing in the mirror wasn't me anymore. It looked like me, yes, but its eyes were all wrong. They were too wide. Too black. A grin stretched unnaturally across its face, splitting the skin at the corners of its mouth. Blood dripped down its chin, then up, defying gravity. "You see it now," Carl said, stepping beside me. "You were never guarding a demon. You were raising it. With fear. With belief. With every dead Mercer, it grew stronger." The mirror showed flashes, images so fast they sliced into my brain. My ancestors, kneeling in circles, carving sigils into their flesh. A man in chains, screaming as black smoke poured from his eyes. A young girl with the Mercer eyes, lowering herself into the pit with a smile. Each image was worse than the last. I tried to stop chanting, but my mouth kept moving. The mirror was pulling something out of me, memories, pain, blood, I don't know. Carl gripped my shoulder. "We're just vessels, Theo. Meet with memory. But you can be more." The air roared. The mirror cracked. A shriek burst from the stone. Not a sound, but a feeling, like my bones were crying. The mirror bled light. White and red and black all at once. The runes around the tomb ignited, swirling in a pattern too perfect to be man-made. Carl stepped into the light. His body writhed, bones snapping, skin peeling. But he didn't scream. He laughed. As if the pain was joy. As if he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. "You don't have to fight it," he said, turning to me as his face split open like rotted fruit. "It already knows your name." The mirror shattered. Shards flew out, slicing my arms, my face. But I didn't move. Couldn't. Something had stepped through. Not a form. Not flesh. A presence. Like a shadow that filled the room without being seen. I dropped the book. A voice filled my skull, not speaking words, but flooding me with images. Cities sinking beneath ash. Children screaming in languages never spoken by man. The sky tearing open, revealing eyes the size of oceans. I screamed. I think I screamed. But I couldn't hear myself over the sound of my mind breaking. Then just as suddenly silence. Carl was gone. The mirror was dust. And I was alone in the dark, shaking, bleeding, and still alive. But something was wrong. I heard breathing, but it wasn't mine. It was inside me. Slow. Calm. Like something had finally made its home. And deep in my bones, I heard a whisper. "Now we begin." I could barely stand. My legs shook with every step, like the bones inside me had started to rot. The walls of the vault groaned around me. Stones cracked. Dust fell like ash from the ceiling. I had reached the final chamber, the heart of it all. The mirror stood tall, taller than a man, its glass surface smooth as water. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't just me. Behind my image was Carl, or the thing that had worn him like a coat. Its eyes were too wide. Its smile didn't match his lips. "You came back," it said. My mouth was dry. I clutched the book of sealing against my chest like it could protect me. The symbols inside were burned into my mind now, bloody strokes of ink and madness. Carl took a step toward me. No footsteps, no sound. Just motion. "I knew you would. You always needed answers. Even when you were a boy." He was right. I needed to know what had happened to him. What was buried here. What my family had been guarding for generations. The room trembled. The air was thick, like breathing through wet wool. Shadows bled from the stone, crawling across the floor, inching toward my boots. "What are you?" I asked. My voice cracked like old wood. Carl tilted his head. "I'm what's left. After the fear. After the prayers. After the silence." I opened the book, my hands shaking. The mirror right. It had to be done here. Before the seal failed entirely. Before Morithal, or whatever name it wore, broke free into the world. The words weren't just words. They pulled at me as I spoke them, twisting around my tongue, slicing into my mind like knives. "Dulmora, Esrathal Vinatesh." Carl screamed. No, not screamed. He howled like something ancient and starving. The walls split open. The mirror shattered. But the reflection remained, floating in shards around me. I saw myself 100 times, old, young, rotting, laughing, burning. And Carl was all of them. "You're too late," he hissed. "I opened the door the night I died. All you've done is step through it." I reached for the final line in the ritual, but I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. My arms had gone numb. Blood trickled from my nose. I saw my mother in the mirror, then my grandfather, then a mercer from centuries ago, all of them kneeling in this same place, speaking the same words, sealing the same lie. We weren't guarding a demon. We were feeding it, with our fear, our blood, our devotion. I had to finish it. I screamed the last line. The room erupted. Not in fire. Not in wind. In silence. Everything stopped. Time, thought, sound. The presence was torn away from Carl's form like wet paper peeling from bone. His body collapsed into dust. The mirror turned black. The shadows retreated like smoke in reverse. And then it was over. I was alone. The vault was quiet. The stones still warm under my feet. I stood there for what felt like hours, watching nothing move. Eventually I climbed out. My legs barely worked. My skin felt like it didn't belong to me anymore. Outside, dawn had broken. The sky was soft and gray. The house behind me crackled with fire, started from something I must have knocked over, or maybe something that needed to burn. I didn't look back. The forest was silent as I walked away. No birds. No wind. Just my heartbeat. And one more thing. A whisper. Not from the vault. Not from the woods. From inside my skull. It said, "Now you're the door, Theo." And I kept walking.